A biased and racist flight attendant, a black woman in first class. A high-stakes conflict 30,000 feet in the air, but there's a twist that the racist flight attendant never expected. Get ready for a story that unravels the type of prejudice that black people go through every day, unseen and hidden. Aaliyah Johnson stepped onto the plane, her heels clicking against the polished flooring as she adjusted the strap of her designer laptop bag. First-class accommodations weren't new to her. She'd earned this luxury with years of hard work and sleepless nights. Still, there was a certain satisfaction in settling into the plush leather seat, a testament to how far she'd come. She placed her bag beneath the seat, pulling out her phone to glance at her calendar for the week. A multi-million-dollar civil rights case loomed ahead. But for now, this flight was a brief respite. Closing her eyes, she leaned back, letting the soft hum of the engines soothe her. The chatter of passengers filling the cabin seemed distant, until a sharply polite voice interrupted her tranquility. "Ma'am?" the flight attendant said, her smile tight as she lingered at Aaliyah's row. "Can I see your ticket, please?" Aaliyah opened her eyes and looked up at the woman. Mid-40s, neatly pressed uniform, blonde hair pinned in a flawless twist. She radiated authority, but something in her tone suggested it wasn't a simple request. Aaliyah handed over the ticket without hesitation. Natalie Parker's gaze flicked over the boarding pass, her lips tightening. She murmured, holding it a moment too long before returning it. "I just needed to check." Sometimes passengers get confused about seating. "Not me," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady. "I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Of course," Natalie said with a clipped laugh. She lingered a second longer before moving down the aisle, muttering under her breath, "Well, first class certainly isn't what it used to be." Aaliyah stiffened, but chose to let the comment pass, focusing instead on the work email blinking on her phone. Her peace didn't last long. As Natalie made her rounds, Aaliyah noticed the subtle glances, the not-so-accidental delays in service at her row. When Natalie accidentally bumped her tray table while serving the passenger across the aisle, spilling a splash of water onto her lap, Aaliyah began to suspect it wasn't all coincidence. The whispers started soon after. Small, seemingly innocent remarks from Natalie to another flight attendant, glances cast her way. Aaliyah caught fragments. "Double-check if she's even supposed to be here," and "can't take chances these days." By the time the cabin doors closed, Aaliyah was no longer relaxing. Instead, she watched Natalie carefully, her instincts telling her this flight wouldn't be smooth, not because of turbulence, but because of the storm brewing right in her seat. The plane had been in the air for less than 15 minutes when Aaliyah felt the first direct strike of hostility. "Excuse me, ma'am," Natalie said, reappearing at her row with the same tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a clipboard now, a prop that made the encounter feel more official than necessary. "I need to speak with you about your seat." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, glancing at the boarding pass still tucked in the pocket of her blazer. "Is there a problem?" Natalie's expression hardened slightly before she masked it with a forced laugh. "Not exactly, but there seems to have been an error in the seating arrangement. I believe this seat might have been assigned incorrectly. Would you mind moving to a seat in the main cabin? We'll make sure you're comfortable." Aaliyah's lips curved into a polite, tight smile. "This is the seat I paid for, so I'll stay here. If there's an error, you might want to check with whoever assigned it." Natalie's cheeks flushed a faint pink, and her clipboard sagged slightly in her hands. "Ma'am, it's a simple misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this without any fuss." "I agree," Aaliyah said firmly, her tone still calm. "There's no fuss. I'm staying in my assigned seat." The interaction drew the attention of nearby passengers. A man in the adjacent row lowered his tablet, his curious gaze flicking between them. Another passenger leaned slightly forward, whispering to her seatmate. Aaliyah noticed it all but refused to let it rattle her. Natalie sighed audibly, shifting her weight to one hip as she clutched the clipboard. "Look," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "We both know how these things happen. Sometimes people end up in the wrong place, even if they don't mean to. I'm just trying to make sure everything is in order." Aaliyah's stomach tightened. People like me, you mean? Natalie's eyes widened for a split second before narrowing. That's not what I said, she snapped. Don't put words in my mouth. No, Aaliyah said, her voice cutting through the cabin's low hum. But that's exactly what you implied. A soft murmur rippled through the first-class section. Natalie's forced smile was long gone now, replaced by a look of barely concealed frustration. Her knuckles whitened around the clipboard. Aaliyah could feel the air thickening with tension, each word charged like an electric current. Natalie glanced down the aisle, as if hoping for backup, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I'm giving you a chance to resolve this quietly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Aaliyah leaned back in her seat, her calm demeanor unwavering. The only person making this hard is you. If you're done harassing me, I'd like to enjoy my flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the cruising altitude and welcoming everyone on board. Natalie hesitated, her jaw tightening, before straightening up and retreating down the aisle. Aaliyah watched her go, sensing that this wasn't over. A few minutes later, the beverage service began, with another flight attendant making rounds in first class. Natalie's absence was notable, but it didn't last long. She reappeared with another staff member, this one younger and visibly uneasy. She's refusing to move, Natalie said, her voice sharp, but low enough to avoid the captain's notice. I need you to back me up here. The younger flight attendant hesitated, her eyes darting to Aaliyah, and then to the clipboard Natalie thrust into her hands. I don't think this is— Just do your job, Natalie snapped. Aaliyah folded her arms, her calm exterior beginning to crack. She'd been patient, but patience was a finite resource. Let me save you the trouble. If you're planning to escalate this, go right ahead. I'm sure my lawyer would love to hear how your airline treats paying customers. Natalie stiffened, her confidence faltering as nearby passengers leaned in, openly watching the exchange. The younger attendant fumbled with the clipboard, clearly uncomfortable. Aaliyah caught the apologetic glance she cast her way before scurrying off. Michael Rivera, seated in coach, adjusted his camera lens discreetly, angling it through the gap in the curtain. He'd been recording since Natalie's first approach, and his instincts told him this story was far from over. The murmurs grew louder as Natalie, now visibly flustered, leaned down toward Aaliyah once more. You people always make everything about race, she hissed under her breath, her tone venomous. I'm just doing my job. Aaliyah's eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. And I'm just sitting in my seat. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with someone who cares. Natalie straightened abruptly, her face blotchy with anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but caught herself, spinning on her heel and marching down the aisle. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, some sympathetic, others indifferent, and a few blatantly hostile. She didn't care. Let them look. She wasn't going anywhere. The cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet, but Aaliyah remained vigilant. She noticed Natalie pacing near the galley, her expression tense as she whispered to another flight attendant. The glances they threw her way were unmistakable, and Aaliyah knew it was only a matter of time before the next confrontation. Sure enough, Natalie returned, this time with the younger flight attendant in tow. The younger woman looked as if she wanted to be anywhere else. Natalie, however, wore an air of forced calm that did little to mask her simmering frustration. Ms. Johnson, Natalie began, her voice saccharine. We've checked our records again, and it seems there's still a discrepancy with your seat assignment. I'm afraid you'll have to move to the back of the plane. Aaliyah set down her book and turned her full attention to the flight attendant. I already told you, there's no discrepancy. I paid for this seat, and I'm staying here. Natalie's smile faltered, and her true irritation shone through. I understand you feel entitled to this seat, but I'm telling you, there's been a mistake. Aaliyah's patience snapped. Let me be perfectly clear. The only mistake here is how you're treating me. I'm not moving. Natalie leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as her professionalism cracked. You don't get to talk to me like that. I'm trying to do my job. But of course, people like you always have to make a scene. The air seemed to freeze around them. Aaliyah's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. And what exactly do you mean by people like me? Natalie's face flushed. You know exactly what I mean. Nearby passengers began whispering, their gazes bouncing between Aaliyah and Natalie. The tension in the cabin was palpable. One passenger, an older man in a business suit, cleared his throat loudly. But Natalie ignored him. You're being unreasonable, Natalie said, louder this time, as if trying to garner support. It's not that complicated. We can resolve this quickly if you just cooperate. Aaliyah folded her arms. Cooperate with what? Your blatant racism? Natalie recoiled as if struck. Excuse me? How dare you accuse me of something like that? I dare, Aaliyah said, her tone cutting. Because that's exactly what this is. You haven't harassed anyone else in this cabin, just me. And everyone here knows it. There was a brief silence before another voice broke through. She's right, said a middle-aged woman 2 rows back. Her voice was soft but firm. I've been watching the whole time. You're singling her out. Natalie's head snapped toward the woman. This has nothing to do with anyone else. I'm simply following protocol. Sure you are, the woman replied, crossing her arms. And I suppose protocol includes muttering about her under your breath? I heard you loud and clear. A ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin, and Natalie's composure wavered. She glanced toward the galley, clearly hoping for support, but the younger flight attendant who had accompanied her avoided her gaze, stepping back into the aisle. Meanwhile, Michael Rivera, seated in coach, adjusted his camera to capture the scene. He'd been recording from the moment Natalie had first approached Aaliyah, and now he zoomed in on the heated exchange. His instincts told him this was a story that needed to be told. Natalie's voice rose. I don't have to explain myself to any of you. I'm in charge of this cabin, and I'll decide what's appropriate. Aaliyah remained seated, her voice calm and even. No, what you'll do is stop harassing me and do your job. Unless, of course, you'd like me to escalate this further. Natalie blinked, clearly thrown by Aaliyah's composure, but her anger quickly returned. You want to escalate this? Fine. I'll get the captain involved. Please do, Aaliyah said, gesturing toward the cockpit door. Let's see how far you're willing to take this. Natalie hesitated for a moment before storming off, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as passengers began discussing what they'd witnessed. Some openly sided with Aaliyah, while others muttered about staying out of it. Aaliyah exhaled, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wasn't afraid of confrontation, but the blatant nature of Natalie's actions left her feeling exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. She caught the eye of the middle-aged woman who had spoken up earlier and offered a small nod of thanks. Moments later, Natalie returned with the captain in tow. His expression was a mix of irritation and confusion. Clearly, he wasn't pleased about being dragged into the situation. What seems to be the issue here? He asked, his tone weary. Natalie launched into a rehearsed explanation, painting Aaliyah as uncooperative and disruptive. But before she could finish, Aaliyah interrupted. Captain, I'm happy to clarify. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for, and this flight attendant has been harassing me from the moment I boarded. Her behavior is completely unacceptable, and I have witnesses to back me up. The captain frowned, glancing between Aaliyah and Natalie. Is that true? He asked, addressing the other passengers. Several passengers nodded, and one spoke up. I've seen everything. She's been targeting her for no reason. Natalie's face turned red, and her mouth opened and closed, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I see, the captain said, his tone cold. Ms. Parker, can I speak to you in the galley? Natalie stiffened, but she had no choice but to follow him. As they walked away, Aaliyah leaned back in her seat, her body still tense, but her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. The captain returned to the cabin after a short but intense conversation in the galley. His expression was carefully neutral, but the tension in his posture was evident. He walked straight to Aaliyah, who sat upright, her composure unshaken despite the growing frustration in her chest. Ms. Johnson, the captain began, his voice measured. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding. Ms. Parker has raised concerns about seating arrangements. And to avoid any further disruption for other passengers, I kindly ask that you move to a seat in the main cabin." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. "So let me get this straight. You're asking me, the paying customer sitting in the seat I was assigned, to move because your flight attendant can't handle the sight of me here?" The captain's jaw tightened, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "I'm asking for your cooperation to ensure the rest of the flight proceeds without incident." "Incident?" Aaliyah repeated, her tone sharp. "The only incident here is the blatant racism I've been subjected to since I stepped onto this plane. I refuse to be punished for her behavior." The captain opened his mouth to respond, but Natalie appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, and a smug look plastered across her face. "Captain," she interjected, "I've just confirmed with corporate that Ms. Johnson's seat assignment is flagged as part of an irregular booking. It seems there was a glitch in the system, and the seat wasn't officially cleared for her use." Aaliyah froze, anger coursing through her veins. "What kind of nonsense is this?" Natalie's voice oozed faux sympathy as she held up the clipboard. "I'm afraid these things happen. We're happy to accommodate you in the main cabin. And of course, we'll provide a voucher for the inconvenience." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin, passengers now openly speculating on what was happening. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the armrest. She could feel the heat of every gaze on her, waiting to see what she would do. "You can't be serious," Aaliyah said, her voice low but firm. "This is a thinly veiled attempt to humiliate me, and you know it." Natalie leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but venomous. "If you don't move now, I'll have security waiting for you when we land. It's your choice." For a moment, Aaliyah's resolve wavered. She wasn't afraid of a fight, but she knew how easily situations like this could spiral out of control, especially when someone like Natalie was involved. Images of headlines ran through her mind. "Black woman removed from first-class seat in dispute." The narrative twisted against her. Her dignity dragged through the mud. With a deep breath, she stood. The cabin fell silent, and Natalie's smirk grew wider. "I'll move," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the fury burning inside her. "But not because you're right, only because this isn't over. And when I'm done, you'll wish you had handled this differently." Natalie blinked, the confidence in her expression faltering for the first time. Aaliyah grabbed her laptop bag and stepped into the aisle, her head held high as she walked toward the main cabin. Whispers followed her, but she refused to look back. As she passed through the curtain, Michael Rivera stood up from his seat. His camera was tucked discreetly in his hand, but his voice was clear and firm. "This isn't right," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "Everyone saw what just happened. Don't think for a second that this won't go public." Aaliyah met his gaze and gave him a small nod of appreciation. Michael sat back down, his focus returning to the footage he'd been capturing throughout the ordeal. The curtain closed behind her, sealing her off from the first-class cabin and the humiliation she'd endured. Aaliyah settled into her new seat in the main cabin, her mind racing. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but her resolve hardened with each beat. She began typing furiously on her laptop, documenting every detail of the incident while it was fresh in her memory. Natalie might have won this battle, but Aaliyah had no intention of letting her win the war. Back in first class, the mood was tense. Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others whispered their outrage. Michael continued to record surreptitiously, his footage now including a shot of Natalie as she strutted back down the aisle, her expression smug. As the plane flew westward, the cracks in Natalie's composure began to show. More passengers were speaking up, and murmurs of discontent grew louder. By the time Natalie returned to the galley, she found herself cornered by a middle-aged woman who had finally decided enough was enough. "You should be ashamed of yourself," the woman hissed, loud enough for everyone in earshot to hear. "This isn't going to end well for you." Natalie's confidence wavered, but she quickly put on her professional mask and brushed the woman off. Still, A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The seeds of resistance had been planted. Aaliyah sat stiffly in her cramped seat in the main cabin, her laptop open on the tray table. The steady hum of the engines was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, documenting everything she could remember. Natalie's comments, the captain's spineless capitulation, and the simmering humiliation of being forced out of a seat she rightfully paid for. Passengers in the rows around her stole glances, their whispers barely muffled. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few wore expressions of quiet disapproval, as if her mere presence made them uncomfortable. Aaliyah ignored them all, channeling her focus into the account she was crafting. Meanwhile, back in first class, the atmosphere had grown frosty. Michael Rivera was still seated, his camera discreetly capturing the aftermath of Aaliyah's forced move. He occasionally glanced at Natalie, who was pacing the aisle with an air of forced calm. Her smugness had ebbed slightly, replaced with a flicker of nervousness as she noticed passengers murmuring and throwing her pointed looks. Michael leaned back in his seat, scrolling through the footage he'd recorded so far. He'd caught almost everything. The condescending remarks, Natalie's smug satisfaction, and, most damning, the moment she leaned in to whisper her veiled threat about security. He knew he had something powerful, but he also knew this story wasn't finished. The tipping point came when the older woman who had defended Aaliyah earlier pressed the call button. Natalie approached, her smile thin and brittle. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" she asked, her tone sugary. "You can explain why you thought it was appropriate to humiliate that woman," the passenger said bluntly, her voice carrying through the cabin. Natalie's smile faltered. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I mean," the woman interrupted. "We all saw what happened. You targeted her from the moment she boarded. It's disgusting. And frankly, I'm appalled this airline allows behavior like yours." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Natalie's cheeks flushed, and her professional mask began to crack. "I was following protocol," she said tightly. "It's my job to ensure seating arrangements are correct." "And that's why you kept muttering about her under your breath? Or why you threatened to call security on her for sitting in her assigned seat?" The woman's tone was sharp and accusatory, leaving Natalie with no room to maneuver. "That's not what happened," Natalie snapped, her voice rising. "You're twisting things," another passenger spoke up, this time a younger man across the aisle. "Actually, I heard you too. And I saw the whole thing. You were way out of line." Natalie's head whipped toward him, her eyes blazing. "I don't need to explain myself to you." "Maybe not," the older woman said coolly. "But you'll have plenty of explaining to do when this goes public." Natalie froze, her expression shifting to one of alarm. "Public?" she echoed. The woman gestured toward Michael, who had stopped pretending to be subtle. His phone was out in plain sight now, aimed directly at Natalie. "Oh yes, you're going to be famous, dear." Smile for the camera. Natalie's face drained of color as she realized just how much of her behavior had been captured. She spun on her heel and stormed toward the galley, muttering under her breath. In the main cabin, Aaliyah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen to find a notification from an unfamiliar number. Opening it, she saw a text from Michael. "I've got everything on video. This isn't over. Stay strong." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. For the first time since boarding the flight, she felt a glimmer of hope. She quickly typed a reply. "Thank you. I'm documenting everything on my end, too." The next few hours passed in a tense stalemate. Natalie kept to the galley as much as possible, avoiding direct eye contact with passengers. Aaliyah stayed focused on her notes, the rhythmic tapping of her keyboard drowning out the hum of the engines. Every so often, Michael glanced back toward the main cabin, exchanging brief nods with Aaliyah. When the captain announced the initial descent into Los Angeles, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Natalie re-emerged, her face carefully neutral as she began preparing for landing. She avoided Aaliyah's gaze as she walked down the aisle, but Aaliyah caught a fleeting look of apprehension in her eyes. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, Aaliyah's resolve hardened. She knew the battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. She closed her laptop, slid it into her bag, and prepared herself for what awaited on the ground. Back in first class, Michael powered off his camera and leaned back in his seat, a satisfied smile on his face. He had everything he needed to expose the truth. And judging by the whispers still rippling through the cabin, so did plenty of others. Natalie, however, looked anything but composed. Her movements were jerky as she gathered her things, and her forced smile had all but disappeared. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. As the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began standing, Michael glanced toward Aaliyah through the curtain one last time. "This is just the beginning," he muttered to himself, tucking his camera into his bag. The plane door opened, and passengers began filing out, the hum of conversation mingling with the shuffle of feet. Aaliyah waited in her seat, unwilling to join the rush. Her thoughts were sharp and focused, each moment of the flight etched clearly in her mind. She couldn't let Natalie's actions slide, not after everything that had happened. As the aisle cleared, Michael Rivera stood in first class, his camera now tucked away, but his expression resolute. He glanced toward the main cabin, catching Aaliyah's eye through the curtain. He gave a small nod, as if to reassure her that he hadn't stopped recording, and that she wasn't alone in this fight. Aaliyah finally rose, adjusting her bag over her shoulder. As she moved toward the exit, the younger flight attendant from earlier approached her hesitantly. She looked around nervously, as though checking to see if Natalie was watching. The woman began, her voice low. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. It wasn't fair." Aaliyah stared at her for a moment, gauging the sincerity in her tone. "Then why didn't you say anything when it mattered?" The woman's shoulders sagged. "I was scared. Natalie can be difficult to stand up to." Aaliyah's voice was firm but calm. "Your fear doesn't excuse your silence. You were complicit in what she did." The attendant nodded, her expression a mix of guilt and shame. "You're right," she whispered. "I should have spoken up." Aaliyah didn't have time for a longer conversation. Without another word, she walked past the attendant toward the jet bridge. As she neared the door, she saw Natalie standing there, her professional mask back in place. The smugness that had defined her earlier demeanor was gone, replaced with a veneer of forced calm. "Have a good day," Natalie said flatly, her eyes flickering away from Aaliyah's. Aaliyah stopped and turned to face her. "You might want to remember this day," she said, her voice low enough that only Natalie could hear, "because it's going to haunt you." Natalie flinched slightly but said nothing, and Aaliyah walked past her, stepping into the jet bridge with her head held high. In the terminal, the scene was unexpected. A small group of passengers had lingered near the gate, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Michael stood nearby, speaking animatedly with a woman holding a notepad. His camera was now slung around his neck, but its presence alone suggested he was prepared to document anything else that unfolded. Aaliyah slowed as she approached. Michael noticed her and waved her over, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of others. "Ms. Johnson," he called, "would you like to say anything about what happened?" The passengers nearby turned toward her, their murmurs growing louder. Aaliyah hesitated for a moment, the weight of the attention pressing down on her. But then she remembered Natalie's smugness, the whispered comments, the blatant disrespect. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. She straightened her posture and addressed the small group. "What happened on that flight was unacceptable," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I was targeted and humiliated because of someone else's prejudice. I deserve better, and so does everyone who flies with this airline. This isn't just about me, it's about accountability." Michael's camera was back in his hand, capturing every word. The woman with the notepad scribbled furiously, her brow furrowed with concentration. A few of the passengers clapped quietly, nodding in agreement. Before Aaliyah could say more, Natalie emerged from the jet bridge, her face pale and tight. Her gaze swept over the group, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Michael's camera. "Natalie Parker," Michael said, stepping forward. Do you have anything to say about your treatment of Ms. Johnson during the flight? Natalie's composure cracked for a split second, her lips tightening as she shot him a glare. No comment, she snapped. Her voice clipped. She quickened her pace, trying to escape the growing crowd of onlookers. Michael's camera followed her as passengers called out questions, their voices a mix of frustration and curiosity. Aaliyah watched her retreat, a small spark of satisfaction igniting in her chest. Natalie's arrogance was fading, replaced by the reality of what she'd done and what was coming. As the crowd began to disperse, Aaliyah's phone buzzed in her hand. A notification from a social media platform lit up her screen, accompanied by a familiar hashtag, "Chut flying while black." Clicking on it, she saw that Michael's earlier video was already gaining traction, with hundreds of comments pouring in. Outrage filled the posts, calling for justice and accountability. Aaliyah's resolve deepened. This was only the beginning. Natalie wouldn't get away with her behavior, and the airline wouldn't be able to hide behind its policies. Justice wasn't just a possibility. It was inevitable. She glanced at Michael, who was reviewing his footage with a focused expression. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a small nod. He returned it, his determination mirroring her own. As she turned toward the exit, Aaliyah felt a sense of purpose settle over her. This wasn't over. Far from it, but for the first time, she knew she wouldn't be fighting this battle alone. Aaliyah stepped out of the terminal and into the crisp Los Angeles air, her mind still reeling from the confrontation on the plane. Her phone buzzed incessantly, notifications piling up as Michael's video gained traction online. She skimmed the comments, feeling a mix of outrage, support, and disbelief pouring in from strangers. This was no longer just her story. It was becoming a movement. Her focus was broken by a voice behind her. "Ms. Johnson." She turned to see Michael Rivera jogging to catch up, his camera still slung across his chest. He looked determined, his brow furrowed as though the events of the flight had affected him as deeply as they had her. "I'm glad I caught you," he said, slightly out of breath. "Look, I'm sorry for what you went through back there. It was disgusting. I've uploaded everything I captured. It's already going viral." Aaliyah regarded him for a moment, her initial gratitude mingling with skepticism. "Why are you doing this?" she asked bluntly. "What's in it for you?" Michael hesitated, then shrugged. "I'm a journalist, sure, but I'm also a person who's tired of seeing things like this happen. If I can help expose the truth, maybe it'll make a difference." His sincerity was evident, and Aaliyah nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate it." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the video as they walked toward the baggage claim. "It's not just the footage that's blowing up," he said. "People are digging up complaints about Natalie Parker. This isn't the first time she's been accused of misconduct." Aaliyah stopped mid-step. "What?" "Yeah," Michael continued, his voice lowering. "Looks like there are multiple incidents of her targeting passengers, though nothing quite this blatant. Most of them didn't go public, just filed quietly and swept under the rug." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. "Of course they were," she muttered. "That's how these things always go." Michael glanced at her. "Not this time. You've got people backing you now, and the airline's already scrambling. They're going to have to respond." Before Aaliyah could reply, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. She recognized the number immediately. It was the airline's customer service line. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "This is Aaliyah Johnson." "Ms. Johnson, this is Rachel Bennett from the airline's legal department," the voice on the other end said, clipped but professional. "We're aware of the incident on your flight today and would like to discuss how we can resolve the matter." Aaliyah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Resolve the matter? I don't think an apology and a voucher are going to cut it." There was a brief pause. "We're prepared to discuss compensation," Rachel said cautiously, "but we'd like to avoid any unnecessary publicity." Aaliyah's anger flared. "Publicity? You're worried about your image while I was humiliated and forced out of my seat? Your flight attendant acted with blatant racism, and your staff backed her up. Do you really think throwing money at this will make it go away? Ms. Johnson, I assure you, we take these matters seriously. I'll bet you do now that it's trending, Aaliyah interrupted, her voice cold. If you were serious, you'd have addressed the other complaints against her before this ever happened. Another pause. We'll need time to investigate those allegations, Rachel said finally. In the meantime, we'd appreciate it if you could refrain from making further public statements. Aaliyah let out a sharp laugh. Let me save you the trouble. No, I'm not staying silent. And I'm not letting this go. Before Rachel could respond, Aaliyah ended the call, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped her phone. Michael watched her carefully, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. You okay? He asked. I'm fine, she said, though her tone was clipped. They're scared, which means we're getting somewhere. As they reached the baggage claim, Aaliyah spotted a cluster of reporters gathered near the exit. Their cameras swiveled in her direction as she approached, microphones raised like weapons. Michael glanced at her. You don't have to talk to them if you're not ready, he said. Aaliyah squared her shoulders. No, I do. This isn't just about me anymore. She stepped forward, the reporters closing in like a wave. Questions flew at her from every direction, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Ms. Johnson, can you comment on the video going viral? Do you believe the airline condones discrimination? What are your next steps? Aaliyah raised a hand, silencing the crowd. What happened to me today was wrong, she said firmly. It wasn't just about a seat. It was about being treated as less than, about someone using their authority to demean and dehumanize me. I won't let that stand. I intend to hold the airline accountable and ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Her voice was strong, unwavering, and the crowd quieted as she spoke. She could see Michael recording from the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. As the reporters pressed for more details, Aaliyah kept her answers measured, refusing to let emotion cloud her message. By the time she stepped away, the murmurs of support and outrage from the crowd were undeniable. Michael caught up to her again as she headed for the exit. That was powerful, he said. You're making waves. Aaliyah glanced at him. Good, because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. She walked into the waiting car, her mind already racing with plans for what came next. Natalie Parker and the airline wouldn't know what hit them. The car ride home gave Aaliyah a chance to collect her thoughts. She scrolled through her phone, the screen lighting up with a constant stream of notifications. Michael's video had taken on a life of its own, spreading across social media platforms with hashtags like Flying While Black and Airline Racism gaining momentum. Each new post brought a mixture of anger, outrage, and calls for justice. Her resolve deepened as she read through the comments. Strangers were sharing their own stories of discrimination on flights, amplifying the discussion. This wasn't just about Natalie anymore. It was about exposing a culture of prejudice and ensuring accountability. Her thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of an incoming call. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, but she answered anyway, her tone cautious. This is Aaliyah Johnson. Ms. Johnson, this is Sharon Goodman, a reporter with the Daily Sentinel. The voice on the other end said briskly, I'm covering the growing backlash against the airline after today's incident. Do you have a moment to comment? Aaliyah hesitated. She wasn't sure how much she wanted to say yet, but she also knew the importance of controlling her narrative. I can give you a brief statement, she said finally. Excellent, Sharon replied. Can you confirm that you were removed from your first-class seat by a flight attendant, despite having paid for it? That's correct, Aaliyah said, keeping her voice calm but firm. I was targeted and humiliated because of the color of my skin. The flight attendant used her authority to demean me, and then attempted to cover it up by fabricating a seating discrepancy. And what do you plan to do next? Sharon pressed. I'm pursuing legal action, Aaliyah said, without hesitation. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring this kind of behavior doesn't continue. People need to be held accountable. Sharon thanked her for the statement and ended the call, leaving Aaliyah with a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. She knew her words would add fuel to the growing fire, but that was exactly what she intended. When she arrived home, she barely had time to put down her bag before her phone rang again. This time, it was her attorney, Charles Porter. His voice was calm but serious. "Aaliyah, I've been monitoring the situation," he said. "We need to move quickly. The airline's already facing significant backlash, and we can leverage that to push for a settlement or a full-scale lawsuit." "I want to sue," Aaliyah said firmly. "No settlements. They need to face real consequences." "Understood," Charles replied, "but be prepared. They'll try to discredit you, dig into your past, anything to deflect blame." "Let them," Aaliyah said coldly. "I have nothing to hide." Meanwhile, back at the airline's corporate offices, chaos was unfolding. Rachel Bennett, the legal advisor who had called Aaliyah earlier, stood in a tense meeting with the company's PR and executive teams. The video footage, coupled with Aaliyah's public statements, had thrown the airline into damage control mode. "This is a disaster," one executive said, slamming his hand on the table. "That video has over 1 million views, and every major news outlet is picking it up. What the hell was Natalie thinking?" "We need to act fast," Rachel interjected. "We've already reached out to Ms. Johnson to discuss a resolution, but she's not interested in settling quietly." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, another executive spoke. "We need a scapegoat. Someone to take the fall for this." Rachel's lips thinned. "That's already happening. Natalie Parker has a history of complaints, and this incident will end her career. But if we don't handle this carefully, the backlash won't stop with her." "What are you suggesting?" someone asked. "We issue a public apology and announce an internal review of our policies," Rachel said. "But we also need to be prepared for a lawsuit. Ms. Johnson isn't going to let this go." Back in her apartment, Aaliyah was finalizing her timeline of events when another notification caught her attention. A statement from the airline had just been posted to their social media accounts. She clicked on it, her eyes narrowing as she read, "We are aware of the incident involving Ms. Aaliyah Johnson on Flight 347 and are conducting a full investigation. We take these matters seriously and are committed to ensuring that all passengers are treated with dignity and respect. We sincerely apologize for any distress caused and are working to address the situation." Aaliyah scoffed. The statement was carefully worded, designed to minimize liability while pretending to care. She wasn't impressed. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Michael. "Corporate damage control. Don't let up." She smiled grimly. Michael was right. The airline's carefully crafted apology wasn't enough. The only way to make real change was to keep the pressure on. She opened her laptop and began drafting a statement of her own. If the airline thought they could control the narrative, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The momentum of the situation continued to build as news outlets picked up Aaliyah's story. Interviews were requested. Social media continued to explode, and legal experts weighed in on the potential outcomes of her case. Natalie Parker's name began circulating as well, her history of complaints dragging the airline even deeper into controversy. For Aaliyah, the fight was just beginning, but with every passing moment, she grew more confident that justice was within her grasp. The next morning, Aaliyah woke to a flood of notifications. Her phone buzzed incessantly, the screen lighting up with messages, tags, and calls. The video Michael had posted had gone viral overnight, and now the incident was a trending topic worldwide. News outlets were dissecting the footage, and Natalie Parker's name was now synonymous with bigotry in every major publication. Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through the latest developments. There were articles speculating about Natalie's past, opinion pieces condemning the airline, and hashtags calling for Natalie's termination and systemic change within the industry. Her inbox was flooded with emails from reporters and activists alike, all wanting to speak with her. Her phone rang again, and she saw Charles Porter's name flashing on the screen. She answered quickly. "Morning, Charles." "Morning, Aaliyah," he said, his tone sharp but businesslike. "I've been reviewing the video and your documentation. We're in an excellent position. The airline's apology isn't going to hold up against the backlash. They'll have no choice but to respond to a lawsuit. They're already trying to save face. Aaliyah replied, sipping her coffee. "But I'm not interested in their performative apologies." "Good," Charles said. "I've prepared a formal demand letter, but I'll need your approval before sending it. I'm also lining up interviews with legal analysts to strengthen your case in the public eye." Aaliyah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Send me the draft. I'll look it over today." As soon as she ended the call, another notification popped up. This time, it was a new video. A former flight attendant had come forward, detailing her experience working with Natalie Parker. Aaliyah clicked on the link, her stomach tightening as the woman's face filled the screen. "My name is Lauren Davis," the woman said, her voice steady but emotional. "I worked with Natalie Parker for over 3 years, and what happened to Ms. Johnson doesn't surprise me at all. Natalie has a long history of targeting passengers, especially people of color. I reported her behavior multiple times, but nothing was ever done." Lauren went on to describe several incidents where Natalie had harassed or belittled passengers, each account adding more weight to Aaliyah's case. By the time the video ended, Aaliyah's anger had reignited. The airline's negligence had enabled Natalie's behavior, and now it was all coming to light. Across the city, Natalie Parker was in a state of panic. She sat in her small apartment, surrounded by legal documents and a laptop playing the news on a loop. Her name was everywhere, and the vitriol directed at her was relentless. Social media was flooded with calls for her firing, and her own neighbors had begun avoiding her. Her phone buzzed, and she hesitated before answering. It was Rachel Bennett, the airline's legal advisor. "Natalie," Rachel began, her tone clipped. "We need to talk about damage control." Natalie bristled. "Damage control? What about my side of the story?" "There is no side of the story that justifies your behavior," Rachel said bluntly. "The video speaks for itself, and now former employees are coming forward with additional allegations. You've put us in an impossible position." "I was following protocol," Natalie snapped, her voice rising. "She didn't belong in first class, and I was just doing my job." "Enough," Rachel interrupted, her tone icy. "Your actions have cost the airline millions in PR damage, and we're facing a potential lawsuit that could grow into a class action if other passengers come forward. Frankly, you're lucky we haven't terminated you yet." Natalie's breath hitched, the gravity of her situation finally sinking in. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly. "You'll be placed on unpaid leave effective immediately," Rachel said. "And you are not to speak to the media or make any public statements. The airline will be issuing a more detailed apology, and we're conducting a formal investigation into your behavior." "But this isn't up for discussion," Rachel cut her off. "If you try to fight this, you'll only make things worse." The line went dead, leaving Natalie staring at her phone in disbelief. Back in Aaliyah's apartment, she was finishing her second cup of coffee when Michael called. "Have you seen the latest?" he asked, his voice brimming with energy. "If you mean the former flight attendant's video, yes," Aaliyah replied. "It's blowing up," Michael said, "and it's not just her. A few other employees are coming forward with similar stories. This is turning into a full-blown scandal." Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, a faint smile on her lips. "Good. The more people speak out, the harder it'll be for the airline to bury this." Michael hesitated for a moment. "Are you ready for what's coming next? This is going to get bigger before it gets better." "I'm ready," Aaliyah said firmly. "They started this. I'm just finishing it." As the day went on, the situation continued to escalate. The airline's second apology was released, this time acknowledging Natalie's actions and pledging a full review of their policies. But the statement was met with widespread criticism, with many accusing the company of trying to shift blame onto a single employee rather than addressing systemic issues. Aaliyah's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Charles. "Demand letter sent. Expect their lawyers to respond soon. Stay strong." She read the message and set her phone down, her determination unwavering. The fight was far from over, but with each passing hour, the tide was turning in her favor. Natalie and the airline had underestimated her resolve, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. Aaliyah opened her laptop, ready to draft another public statement. She wasn't done yet, not until justice was fully served. By mid-afternoon, Aaliyah found herself sitting across from Charles Porter in his downtown office. A quiet yet modern space that exuded confidence. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each packed with legal volumes, and a large window overlooked the bustling streets below. Aaliyah had already reviewed the formal demand letter he'd sent to the airline, but now they were preparing for the inevitable pushback. Charles leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. The airline's legal team will likely try to settle quickly. They'll offer money and hope this goes away. Are you sure you're ready to reject that, if it comes? Absolutely, Aaliyah replied without hesitation. This isn't about a payout, it's about accountability. Charles nodded. Good, because once we go public with the lawsuit, the scrutiny will intensify. For both you and them. They'll dig into your past, your career, anything they can use to discredit you. Aaliyah met his gaze, her expression unwavering. I have nothing to hide. He leaned back slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. That's what I like to hear. Now, about the potential class action angle. If more passengers or former employees come forward, we can strengthen our case exponentially. That's already starting to happen with the videos surfacing. Before Aaliyah could respond, Charles's assistant knocked lightly on the door and stepped in, holding a tablet. You're going to want to see this, she said, handing it to him. Charles took the tablet and played a newly uploaded video. The screen showed another former airline employee, this time a man in his early 40s, sitting at a desk with a serious expression. I worked for the airline for 10 years, the man said, his voice steady but grim. I personally witnessed Natalie Parker harass passengers on multiple occasions. She targeted people of color, often under the guise of enforcing policy. I reported her several times, but nothing ever changed. Management always found a way to brush it under the rug. Charles paused the video and set the tablet down. This is exactly what we need. It's no longer just about what happened to you. It's about a pattern of discrimination. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, a mix of anger and resolve tightening in her chest. They knew, she said quietly. They knew what she was doing, and they let it continue. Meanwhile, in a stark conference room at the airline's headquarters, Rachel Bennett was fielding a barrage of questions from the company's senior executives. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with frustration and panic. This is getting out of hand, one executive barked, slamming his fist on the table. We've got ex-employees coming out of the woodwork, accusing us of systemic racism. We need a plan. Rachel, calm and composed despite the chaos, replied, the first step is taking Natalie Parker off the payroll entirely. She's already on unpaid leave, but we need to terminate her contract immediately and make that announcement public. And then what? Another executive demanded. Throw her under the bus and hope that's enough? What about Ms. Johnson? She's not backing down. Rachel's gaze hardened. We need to make a direct offer to her. One that's generous enough to at least consider settling. But we also need to prepare for the possibility that she won't. If this goes to court, we're looking at a PR nightmare. We're already in a PR nightmare, another executive snapped. What about these former employees? Can we discredit them? Rachel's jaw tightened. That's risky. Any attempt to discredit them could backfire spectacularly. We need to show that we're taking their claims seriously, even if it means conducting an internal audit. One executive leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. So we sacrifice Natalie, pretend to clean house, and hope it blows over. Rachel didn't respond immediately, her silence speaking volumes. She knew the truth. This wasn't going to blow over. Not with Aaliyah driving the narrative and the public demanding change. As the airline scrambled to contain the fallout, Aaliyah returned home to find Michael waiting outside her building. He held his phone in one hand, his face lit with a mix of determination and urgency. Something big just happened, he said as she approached. Natalie Parker's been fired. Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. Let me guess. They're hoping that's enough to make this go away. Michael nodded. Exactly. But it's not working. People are calling for a full investigation into the airline's policies. And get this. Another former employee is about to go public with her story. She's willing to testify if this goes to court. Aaliyah unlocked the door and motioned for him to follow her inside. Good. The more voices, the stronger our case. Once inside, Michael pulled out his phone and opened a social media app. "You're trending again," he said, handing her the device. The top post was a clip of Aaliyah's earlier statement to reporters, paired with the headline, "Aaliyah Johnson takes on airline discrimination." Aaliyah set the phone down, her expression thoughtful. "They think firing Natalie is enough. But they're wrong. This isn't just about her. It's about the system that allowed her behavior to continue." Michael leaned forward. "So, what's next?" "We keep pushing," Aaliyah said firmly. "They're scrambling now, but we need to make sure this goes beyond one employee. Policies need to change, and they need to admit their complicity." Michael nodded, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're making history." Aaliyah gave him a small smile. "That's the plan." As the night wore on, Aaliyah continued strategizing with Charles and fielding media inquiries. The tide was turning, but the battle wasn't over. She knew the airline would fight back, but she was ready for whatever came next. The following morning, Aaliyah woke to yet another wave of headlines. This time, the focus was on the airline's newly announced internal investigation into claims of systemic racism. The official statement included promises to review policies, retrain staff, and ensure accountability. But the tone was hollow, as if crafted to pacify rather than enact real change. Charles had warned her this would happen. Corporate lip service designed to make the issue disappear. Aaliyah scrolled through the responses online. Many were skeptical, accusing the airline of trying to save face without addressing the root cause. Others demanded justice for Aaliyah and the employees who had come forward. The pressure was mounting, and the airline's attempts to shift the narrative weren't working. As she finished her breakfast, her phone buzzed with a call from Charles. "Good timing," she said as she picked up. "I was just reading their statement." "It's nothing more than damage control," Charles replied. "They're hoping this investigation will buy them time, but we're not letting up. The lawsuit is already making waves, and now we have another key piece of leverage." "What's that?" Aaliyah asked. Her curiosity piqued. "Several passengers from your flight have agreed to testify," Charles said. "They witnessed everything and are willing to back up your account in court." Aaliyah exhaled in relief. "That's huge. If we can show this wasn't an isolated incident, their case will crumble." "Exactly," Charles said. "And with the former employees' testimonies, we're building a narrative of negligence and systemic issues. This isn't just about Natalie anymore. It's about the airline's failure to act." "Good," Aaliyah said firmly. "They've had this coming for a long time." At the airline's headquarters, Rachel Bennett sat in yet another tense meeting. The fallout from Natalie's firing had only intensified the scrutiny on the company, and the executive team was scrambling to regain control. "The lawsuit is gaining traction," Rachel said, her voice calm but pointed. "We need to prepare for the possibility of this going to trial." One of the executives shook his head. "We can't let it get that far. The optics would be catastrophic." "Then we need to act decisively," Rachel replied. Announcing Natalie's termination was the right move, but it's not enough. The public wants more. They want to see real change. Another executive sighed. "So what do you suggest? Overhaul our entire training program? Fire half the staff?" Rachel's gaze was steady. "We start by settling with Ms. Johnson. A public trial would destroy us. She has witnesses, video evidence, and public support. We can't win this in court." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Finally, the CEO spoke. "Fine, make her an offer, but it needs to include confidentiality. If this goes public, it's over." Later that afternoon, Aaliyah received another call, this time from Rachel Bennett herself. "Ms. Johnson, this is Rachel Bennett, representing the airline," she began, her tone measured but cordial. "I'm aware," Aaliyah replied, her voice neutral. "I'd like to discuss a potential resolution to this matter," Rachel said. "We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement, along with a formal apology for your experience." Aaliyah's grip on the phone tightened. "And what does that settlement come with?" "A non-disclosure agreement," Rachel hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Yes, we'd expect confidentiality as part of the agreement. This would allow us to focus on implementing meaningful changes without further distractions. Aaliyah let out a bitter laugh. Meaningful changes? You mean sweeping this under the rug? Ms. Johnson, we take these allegations seriously, Rachel said, her voice strained. This settlement is an acknowledgement of our commitment to making things right. I'm not interested in hush money, Aaliyah said sharply. I want accountability, public accountability. You've allowed people like Natalie Parker to operate unchecked for years. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been targeted because of your negligence. Please reconsider, Rachel pressed. A trial would be long and difficult for everyone involved. Settling would allow us to resolve this quickly and focus on moving forward. I'm not afraid of a trial, Aaliyah said coldly, but maybe your executives should be. She ended the call without waiting for a response. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was unshaken. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. The airline's efforts to control the narrative were unraveling by the hour. News outlets continued to air interviews with former employees and passengers, each adding another layer to the growing scandal. Social media was ablaze with calls for boycotts and demands for systemic change. Michael Rivera reached out that evening, his voice buzzing with energy. Aaliyah, I just got word that a major civil rights organization wants to back your case. They're offering legal and financial support. That's incredible, Aaliyah said, a small smile breaking through her fatigue. With their help, we can make this even bigger, Michael chuckled. Bigger is an understatement. You're becoming the face of a movement. I didn't ask for that, Aaliyah said softly. But if it's what it takes to make things change, I'll do it. As the call ended, Aaliyah sat back and allowed herself a moment of reflection. The fight was far from over, but she could feel the tide turning. The airline was on the defensive, and for the first time, real accountability seemed within reach. Her phone buzzed with another notification, this time a headline. Civil rights leaders rally behind Aaliyah Johnson. She clicked on it, skimming the article and feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was a collective stand against injustice, and Aaliyah was ready to see it through to the end. The days leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation, media coverage, and mounting tension. Aaliyah worked tirelessly with Charles, reviewing every detail of her case. The growing mountain of evidence, combined with the testimonies of witnesses and former employees, painted a damning picture of the airline's culture and Natalie Parker's unchecked behavior. In Charles's office, the atmosphere was electric as they finalized their strategy. Aaliyah sat across from him, her laptop open as she reviewed the latest witness statements. Beside her, Charles paced, a file in hand. The key to this case, Charles began, is not just proving what happened to you, but demonstrating the airline's systemic negligence. The video is powerful, but the testimonies from former employees and passengers are what will solidify their liability. Aaliyah nodded, her resolve evident. We need to make it clear that this isn't just about one flight attendant. It's about an entire system that allowed her behavior to thrive. Charles stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression serious. Are you ready for the cross-examination? They're going to come after you hard, try to paint you as overly combative or out for money. I'm ready, Aaliyah said firmly. They can try, but the truth is on my side. Before Charles could respond, his assistant entered the room with a stack of papers. The airline's legal team just submitted their pre-trial motions, she said. They're requesting a dismissal, arguing that the incident was an isolated misunderstanding. Charles scoffed as he flipped through the pages. Desperate move. They know this won't hold up with the evidence we have. Aaliyah leaned forward. So they're still trying to sweep this under the rug. Exactly, Charles replied. But we won't let them. This is just the first of many attempts to undermine the case. Stay focused. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters, the tension was palpable. Rachel Bennett sat in a conference room with the airline's top executives and legal counsel. The stakes had never been higher, and the mounting public pressure was taking its toll. "We have to settle before this goes to court," one executive said, his voice sharp with frustration. "A trial will destroy us." "We've tried," Rachel replied evenly. "Ms. Johnson isn't interested in a settlement. She's committed to taking this public." "Then what's our strategy?" another executive demanded. "How do we win this?" Rachel exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "We focus on discrediting the broader claims of systemic issues. If we can isolate this to Natalie Parker's actions alone, we might limit the damage. But we need to be careful. Any misstep could backfire." The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Finally, the CEO spoke. "Make it happen. We can't afford to lose." The day of the trial arrived, and the courthouse buzzed with activity. Reporters crowded outside, their cameras trained on the steps as key players arrived. Aaliyah walked through the crowd with Charles by her side, her expression calm and determined despite the flashing lights and shouted questions. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The airline's legal team sat at their table, a small army of sharp-suited attorneys armed with binders and laptops. Rachel Bennett was among them, her expression unreadable as she scanned the room. Aaliyah took her seat beside Charles, her heart pounding as she surveyed the courtroom. Behind her, rows of supporters filled the gallery. Activists, former employees, and even a few passengers from her flight. The weight of their presence bolstered her resolve. The judge entered, and the trial began. Charles delivered a compelling opening statement, laying out the facts of the case with precision. He emphasized the pattern of discrimination within the airline, supported by witness testimonies and documented complaints. He highlighted the video of the incident, calling it irrefutable evidence of Natalie Parker's misconduct and the airline's failure to address systemic issues. When the airline's lead attorney rose to speak, their strategy became clear. They argued that Natalie's actions were isolated, claiming she was a rogue employee whose behavior did not reflect the company's values. They attempted to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, insisting that the airline had acted promptly by terminating her employment. But the tide began to shift as the first witnesses took the stand. A passenger from Aaliyah's flight testified about what they saw, recounting Natalie's condescending remarks and the blatant targeting of Aaliyah. The video was played for the court, its impact undeniable as the room fell silent. Next came Lauren Davis, the former flight attendant who had worked with Natalie. Her testimony was damning, detailing years of unchecked misconduct and the airline's repeated failure to act on complaints. "I reported her behavior multiple times," Lauren said, her voice steady but emotional. "Each time, management brushed it off. They cared more about avoiding bad PR than protecting passengers." The airline's legal team attempted to discredit her, pointing to her departure from the company as a sign of bias. But Lauren held her ground, her testimony unwavering. When it was Aaliyah's turn to testify, the courtroom grew even quieter. She recounted the events of the flight in vivid detail, her voice calm but firm. She described the humiliation of being targeted and the strength it took to stand her ground. "I wasn't just fighting for myself that day," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "I was fighting for everyone who's ever been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of a culture that allows discrimination to go unchecked." The airline's attorneys tried to rattle her, questioning her motives and suggesting she was seeking publicity. But Aaliyah remained poised, deflecting their attempts with measured responses. By the end of the day, it was clear the trial was far from over. But Aaliyah felt a surge of confidence as she left the courtroom. The truth was on her side, and she was determined to see this fight through to the end. The courtroom was packed as the trial reached its most critical day. The air buzzed with anticipation as both sides prepared for the final showdown. Aaliyah sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped in her lap. Her heart raced, but her face remained calm and resolute. Charles was beside her, flipping through his notes, his confidence a steadying force. The day began with the airline's lead attorney calling their star witness, the captain of the flight. He was a seasoned professional with decades of experience, and his testimony was intended to bolster the airline's narrative of a misunderstanding. The captain took the stand, his uniform pristine and demeanor composed. "I remember the incident," he began, his voice even. "There was confusion over Ms. Johnson's seat assignment. Ms. Parker informed me she was following protocol to resolve the issue. Would you say Ms. Parker's actions were inappropriate?" the airline's attorney asked. The captain hesitated, glancing briefly at Aaliyah before responding. "I wouldn't characterize them that way. She was trying to maintain order on the flight." Aaliyah's stomach churned at his words, but she forced herself to remain composed. Charles leaned toward her and whispered, "He's trying to downplay it. We'll handle this in cross." When it was Charles's turn, he rose with a measured confidence that filled the room. "Captain," he began, "you mentioned that Ms. Parker informed you of the seating discrepancy. Did you personally verify her claims?" The captain shifted slightly in his seat. "No, I relied on her report." "So you never checked Ms. Johnson's ticket yourself?" "No, I did not." Charles took a step closer. "And when you were made aware of the video evidence showing Ms. Parker's discriminatory comments and actions, what was your response?" The captain's jaw tightened. "I was concerned, of course." "Concerned," Charles repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Did you take any action to address those concerns?" The captain hesitated again. "I filed a report after the flight." Charles nodded slowly, then turned to the jury. "A report filed after the damage was already done." "Thank you, Captain. No further questions." The turning point came when Charles called Natalie Parker to the stand. She walked to the witness box with a stiff posture, her face a mask of defiance. The room seemed to hold its breath as she was sworn in. Charles wasted no time. "Ms. Parker, you've stated that your actions were motivated by protocol. Can you explain why you targeted Ms. Johnson specifically?" Natalie's lips thinned. "I wasn't targeting her. There was a discrepancy with her ticket, which, as we've established, was valid," Charles said, his tone sharp. "Yet you insisted on removing her from first class. Why?" "I was doing my job," Natalie replied, her voice rising slightly. "Your job," Charles echoed. He picked up a document from the table. "Let's talk about your job. Over the years, multiple complaints were filed against you by passengers and colleagues alike. Complaints alleging discriminatory behavior. Were you aware of these?" Natalie's eyes darted nervously. "Those were misunderstandings." Charles stepped closer. "Misunderstandings? Or a pattern of behavior that went unchecked by your employer?" Natalie's face flushed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Charles cut her off. "Let's move on to the video. In it, you can be heard saying, 'People like her always make everything about race.' Care to explain that statement?" Natalie's confidence faltered completely. I misspoke." "Misspoke?" Charles said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Or revealed your true intentions?" The courtroom was silent as Natalie fumbled for an answer. Charles let the moment linger before addressing the jury directly. "This is not an isolated incident. It's the result of a systemic failure, a culture that allowed this behavior to go unpunished." The final blow came when Charles called Lauren Davis back to the stand for rebuttal. Her testimony was brief but powerful, solidifying the pattern of negligence within the airline. "I reported Ms. Parker's behavior multiple times," Lauren said, her voice steady, "but nothing was ever done. The company cared more about avoiding bad press than protecting passengers." The jury's expressions were telling. The weight of the evidence, combined with the powerful testimonies, was undeniable. When the time came for closing arguments, Charles delivered a speech that left the courtroom riveted. Ms. Johnson was not just a passenger that day. She became a target of discrimination, a victim of a system that failed her and many others. This case isn't just about one person. It's about holding a corporation accountable for fostering an environment where prejudice thrives unchecked. Justice demands action, not silence. The airline's attorney gave their closing argument, trying to deflect blame onto Natalie as a lone bad actor. But the cracks in their defense were too large to cover. As the trial concluded, Aaliyah felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The jury was dismissed to deliberate, leaving everyone in a tense waiting game. Aaliyah sat with Charles, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You did everything right," Charles said quietly. "Now we wait." Hours later, the jury returned. The four-person stood, and the courtroom held its collective breath. In the matter of Johnson versus Meridian Airlines, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Aaliyah Johnson. A wave of relief and vindication swept over Aaliyah. The judge announced the damages, a substantial monetary award, and a directive for the airline to implement mandatory diversity and anti-discrimination training across all departments. As the courtroom erupted into murmurs, Aaliyah turned to Charles, a small but triumphant smile on her face. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it," Charles replied. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, cameras flashing as she stepped into the spotlight. This was more than a personal victory. It was a moment of change, a beacon of accountability that would resonate far beyond the courtroom. The courtroom victory sent shockwaves through the media, sparking nationwide conversations about accountability and systemic discrimination. Aaliyah became an overnight symbol of resilience and justice. But as she stepped out of the courthouse into a sea of reporters, she knew her fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a larger movement. "Ms. Johnson," one reporter called out, shoving a microphone in her direction. "How do you feel about today's verdict?" Aaliyah paused, her voice calm but resolute. "I feel relieved. But more than that, I feel determined. This verdict is a step toward justice, but it's not enough. Companies like Meridian Airlines need to do more than issue apologies. They need to dismantle the systems that allow discrimination to persist. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been targeted, silenced, or ignored." Her words carried through the crowd, sparking a wave of murmurs and applause from supporters gathered nearby. Michael Rivera stood to the side, recording everything. He gave her a nod of encouragement, his camera capturing the moment for the world to see. Later that evening, Aaliyah sat in her apartment, surrounded by flowers, cards, and emails of support. The outpouring of solidarity was overwhelming, but it also reinforced the weight of what she had taken on. She scrolled through social media, where her name trended alongside hashtags demanding corporate reform. Her phone buzzed with a call from Charles. "You've seen the news?" he asked. "Hard to miss it," she replied, glancing at her TV, where a panel of legal experts debated the broader implications of her case. "They're calling this a landmark moment," Charles said. "The damages awarded, the mandated reforms. It's going to set a precedent." Aaliyah leaned back, letting out a deep breath. "Good, but I'm not stopping here." Charles chuckled lightly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. What's next?" "I want to make sure the airline follows through on their promises," she said. "And I want to use this momentum to push for change in the industry as a whole. If this can happen at Meridian, it's happening elsewhere too." "You've got the platform to do it," Charles said. "And if you need legal support, you know where to find me." "Thank you, Charles," Aaliyah said sincerely. "I couldn't have done this without you." Across the city, Natalie Parker sat in her darkened apartment, watching the news in silence. Her face was pale, her once confident demeanor replaced with bitterness and regret. The verdict had not only cost her a career, but had made her a pariah. Neighbors avoided her, and her family refused to take her calls. The public humiliation was complete. As the screen flashed images of Aaliyah addressing the crowd, Natalie's lips tightened. For the first time, she felt the weight of her actions. Not just their impact on herself, but on the woman she had tried to diminish. The following week, Aaliyah was invited to speak at a major civil rights conference. Standing before a packed auditorium, she recounted her story, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. "What happened to me wasn't unique," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "It's part of a larger pattern, a system that needs to be dismantled. We can't allow discrimination to hide behind policies or go unchecked by corporations that prioritize profits over people. Together, we can hold them accountable." The crowd erupted in applause, and Aaliyah felt a surge of pride. She had turned her pain into purpose, using her platform to amplify voices that had been silenced for too long. Meanwhile, Meridian Airlines announced sweeping reforms in response to the court's ruling. Mandatory diversity training was implemented across all departments, and an independent oversight committee was established to handle complaints. The company's CEO publicly acknowledged their failings, pledging to rebuild trust with their customers and employees. But the victory wasn't just a corporate one. Passengers who had faced similar injustices began sharing their stories, sparking a wave of activism that extended far beyond the airline industry. Months later, Aaliyah found herself on another flight, this time as a guest speaker traveling to Washington, D.C., to testify before Congress on the need for federal regulations to address discrimination in the airline industry. As she settled into her seat, the flight attendant approached her with a genuine smile. "Ms. Johnson," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did, it's making a real difference." Aaliyah smiled back, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she replied, "but there's still more work to do." As the plane took off, Aaliyah gazed out the window, her mind already racing with ideas for what came next. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who deserved better. The journey had been long and grueling, but Aaliyah knew one thing for certain: justice wasn't a destination. It was a path, and she was determined to keep walking it.